Hope everybody is back from the break. And as some of you have also noted in the chat, there are some really good points which are being made in the slide deck, and thanks to all those who are taking the trouble to write in that deck, especially for students who are still not yet in that stage of the PhD. Looking at this slide deck will give you a lot of ideas on what are the typical challenges at each stage of the PhD and how others have overcome them. So I again encourage everyone to at least go through the slide deck even if you have not written anything in it yet. Okay. Coming to this session, now we will talk about some concerns, and I'll share a little bit more of my philosophy and so on, and then we will go into Q&A. So that's basically what we are going to do now. So one concern that sometimes people have is what to do when you are stuck, because you are also exploring an unknown area, and what to do when you are stuck as a guide. So some do's and don'ts that I have found useful is that we should talk to colleagues and get feedbacks and suggestions on the plan. Now if you are continuing on a topic that you are familiar with, this may be obvious, but it's much more important when you are working on a topic which is not your primary area of expertise. So identifying these colleagues is very important, to whom you can talk to and get suggestions. Also it's useful to reevaluate whether it is okay to flounder for some more time or to change the plan. Sometimes it's okay because then you hit upon a breakthrough. Sometimes you have to say that, look, this is a dead end, I need to change the plan. Some don'ts. So one very important one is don't wait till the end, till either the research committee or some paper reviewers raise the alarm saying that, hey, look, there's something fundamentally problematic in the methodology or something else in the work. So getting quick feedback on a regular basis is always desirable, and don't transmit your uncertainty to the student. So the student is actually trusting you to navigate this space. While it's important to be honest with the student, sometimes if there is this uncertainty, the student may also start thinking along these lines without having enough data. So what I do is I tell the student, hey, we are figuring this out, but the student needs to have confidence that we will figure it out. Okay, here's an example. I've sought discussion with colleagues on what research design to use, what data to collect, and how to analyze it for different types of problems. I've also consulted senior students and alumni who have knowledge on specific topic necessary for a current student. And why this is, for me, it is important because I work on topics exciting to the student, so I may not be an expert researcher on that topic. And the bottom line here is, I don't want the student to pay the price for my ignorance. Just because I was hesitating to tell a colleague that I don't know something, my student should not pay the price for my lack of knowledge. Another question which comes up very often is, what about publications? Here again there are some fairly straightforward do's and don'ts. So one of the do's is to plan them systematically. So getting early feedback on the research is important. Identify suitable conferences and journals for the student to target early enough. And write in a phased manner, write one idea per paper and in the right order. Target, let's say for example, doctoral consortiums first, and then expand it and keep expanding the paper, the thesis, so that it builds into a thesis. Okay, what you don't want to do is to follow an ad hoc approach or send a paper to a conference simply because of some deadline. You also don't want to leave publications for the last phase of the PhD. Now, this is something that I have done with many students. So I have actually left the publication for the last phase of the PhD, and many of them have not got published. Okay, so to me it is acceptable because my focus is on the student's growth, and I am confident that the student has learned whatever is required to be learned. But still there are a number of publications which could have been written, which did not get written because of not adhering to this point of timely publication. So why do we want to worry about this? There are many reasons, such as institutional requirements and research visibility. However, my main reason for getting students to publish is because writing brings clarity. Okay, it improves your own thinking, it improves your own argumentation skill, and you become more clear about what exactly are you saying. So this is part of the student's training to be a thinker, and you also get feedback. You also, sometimes we think that our idea is great. It's only when we try to write it up and send it somewhere and people shoot it down, that's when we realize that the idea is not so great after all. Okay, so the note is that when you're not an expert in the specific area of the student's interest, identifying the right forums and writing for that audience takes time. So typically one is used to writing in a certain way for a certain community. So now if each student is targeting a different community, as a guide you need to be able to quickly identify how to frame the writing for that community. And also it is obvious that using a trial and error method will have only limited success. So a planned approach, ensuring that we don't leave it to the end, is a good idea. Okay. The next question is, what about secondary projects? Because I talked about the importance of such projects, what about these projects? So here again, what I have found is that it's good to encourage the student to work on some secondary projects other than thesis related. There are many benefits. For example, it can even be a switch from their normal thesis work. They build several other skills, and eventually it helps to strengthen their resume for when they leave. So it's also important to encourage the student to publish such work, because these become the evidence of their breadth and their research competence for when they are going out of the PhD. It's also important to discuss the pros and cons of secondary projects with the student. So it's not a one size fits all solution here. Some students may be on a strict timeline and they may need to only focus on their thesis in order to graduate in the time. Other students may be a little more relaxed in terms of how much time they can take for their PhD. So for them, doing more secondary projects might be the way to go. This also depends upon the guide's own position on the importance of secondary projects. So all of this has to be factored in at this time of discussing secondary projects with the student. Okay, what you don't want to do is to let the student focus too much on secondary projects. Sometimes this happens, and there is a time when as a guide you need to say that, okay, you have done enough secondary projects, now let's make the thesis and get out. Okay. The other thing that we don't want to do is to attempt to include all secondary projects as part of the thesis work. See, often these secondary projects are in a related but a nearby area, but not directly aligned with the thesis. So the temptation to expand the thesis scope to also include the secondary projects sometimes can become high. So here it's important to look at what works as a thesis story and keep it coherent, and let the secondary projects remain as publications and bullets for showing the students' achievements and competence. Okay, here are some examples. Okay, one secondary project by a student actually led towards a thesis direction for another student. So this turned out to be a ready-made problem for another student who had an interest in that topic. Okay. Another secondary project led to a book chapter establishing the student as an expert in a new area. So that was not the area of the student's work, it was a secondary project, but it turned out to establish the student as an expert in that area. Some secondary projects have themselves become the primary project for a student. Sometimes that also happens. And finally, secondary projects such as conference organization or not necessarily core academic activity have a lot of intangible benefits. So students can show these competence when they are interviewing for their next position, and oftentimes this does play a role in getting a appropriate and suitable job as opposed to getting a more routine or more a lower position in the organization. Okay. So here are some more questions from previous participants of such talk. One question is, how do you resist telling the student what to do when they are stuck? Okay, so this is a temptation that we have as a guide, right? We know the path, we have already anticipated. The student is stuck, and now the question is whether to let them be stuck for some time or whether to immediately give them a solution, get them out of it, what to do there. Okay, so in my case, what I do is I use a Socratic questioning style. So instead of telling them the answer, I keep asking questions which helps the student to realize what is the next thing that they need to do in order to get unstuck. Another question was, what habits from your own approach to doing a PhD do you carry into guidance? So this is again a very useful point to reflect upon. So in my case, I used to maintain detailed notes and plans, and I carried this forward to all my students. In your case, it may be a different habit, but what is important is to reflect upon your own journey consciously and identify which of these habits or processes that you follow will work for you as a PhD guide, which you should use along with your students. There has also been a third question which is often comes up about, should I have a co-guide? So this looks like a new area. Should I go with it on my own or should I have a co-guide? So here again, there is not a single answer. So I sometimes have co-guides for various reasons. Okay. So the points to consider here are, what is the complementary expertise that the co-guide can bring for the student's research? What is their commitment towards getting the student graduated? How much time and effort are they willing to put into it? Also, it's important to think of what's in it for them. Why should they participate? What's in it for you? Why should you share credit with the co-guide when with a little more effort you might have done it on your own? And finally, you need to think about how will the student benefit from having a co-guide? Will that expand the student's breadth of understanding or experience from getting two different co-guides, or will it create more complication because different people are pulling in different directions? You say that it should go in one direction, the other person says it should go in a slightly different direction, and that tussle gets transmitted to the student. So these are some questions that one needs to ponder about before deciding about whether to go for a co-guide or not. Okay, there are many more questions and we will take them in the Q&A after this 1-minute break. So what you could do is think of your questions and start typing them in the chat. As soon as I summarize, we can go into the Q&A phase.